to identify the vascular and neural networks of the arm and forearm, or the upper X in total, we will have to identify the brachial plexus and the arteries on the pectoral region. Now, if we have to flip open the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor, and also the biceps, you can fully see the vascular and neural networks of the upper X. To start, we will have to identify this artery right here, which is responsible for all the blood supply of the upper X. This is the axillary artery, a branch of the subclavian artery above here. The axillary artery becomes axillary artery below the first rib. Above the first rib, this is called the subclavian artery, which is directly associated to your aorta. To identify the brachial artery, we will have to trace the axillary artery from its position over at the first rib. We flip the pectoralis major over, the minor over, and here you can see the axillary artery. The axillary artery spans from this area of the pectoral region over on this area of the axillary region to the arm. You have to flip this out, and you can see this artery right here runs through the anterior portion of the arm to the cubital fossa. This is now what we call as the brachial artery. Now, this brachial artery is axillary artery above the level of the teres major. Below the level of the teres major, it becomes the brachial artery. Above, axillary; below, brachial artery. Now, as we go trace this brachial artery towards the forearm region, you can see that it bifurcates into two bifurcations. One, an artery that goes to the radial side of the wrist, and the other going to the ulnar side of the wrist. Now, this is what we call as the radial artery, the lateral bifurcation. The medial bifurcation is what we call as the ulnar artery. If I tug this along, you will see that it moves over here. So that means this is the ulnar artery and this is the radial artery. Now, to discuss the brachial plexus, we will have to identify first the divisions and the chords. The divisions from the first rib will become is divided into two divisions: anterior divisions and posterior divisions. These divisions will give rise to the three major chords of the brachial plexus. This is the lateral chord, and this is the medial chord. If you can see, they are connected, and the posterior chord is right here. Specifically, it comes from this branch. Okay. They are called disc chords as is because they are found lateral to the axillary artery, medial to the axillary artery, and posterior to the axillary artery. Now, to identify specific major nerves that arises from the three major chords of the brachial plexus, you will see right here. First, this nerve arises from the lateral chord of the brachial plexus. This is called the musculocutaneous nerve, which supplies most of the anterior arm muscles. And here, on the medial cord of the brachial plexus, you will see that it gives rise to this nerve. Now this nerve passes from anterior to the pectoral region into the medial side of the arm to this tunnel right here, just above and posterior to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. This is called the ulnar nerve. Now, as we trace back again, you will see that another major nerve that is being supplied by the lateral cord and the medial cord of the brachial plexus is right here. A very big nerve that passes anterior to the pectoral region, anterior to the arm, and into the cubital fossa of the arm, which supplies most of the anterior muscles of the forearm. This is the median nerve. Another major nerve that should be identified is a nerve that is arising from the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. Now, if this is the posterior cord of the brachial plexus, posterior to the axillary artery, you will see that it gives rise to these nerves. Actually, there are two major nerves. This nerve and this nerve. This nerve is called the radial nerve, which supplies most of the posterior arm muscles and the posterior forearm muscles. It pierces through the triceps muscles right here to go into the posterior portion of the arm through the spiral groove. If we are going to look at it from behind, you can see that the radial nerve is now pierced through the posterior side of the arm around the spiral groove of the humerus to supply most of the muscles of the forearm and the arm on the posterior side. Okay. Now going back to the posterior cord of the brachial plexus, as I've said earlier, there's another nerve that arises from the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. This is called the axillary nerve. This axillary nerve supplies most of the scapular muscles of the human body. Tracing the nerves from the arm region to the forearm region, we will have to identify these major nerves. Now, as you can see right here, this is the median nerve from the lateral and the medial cord. It spans the anterior region of the arm into the cubital fossa. Now, as it goes through after the cubital fossa, it pierces these muscles right here on the anterior portion of the forearm to go in the anterior region of the forearm to the anterior portion of the wrist. Now, as you can see, this nerve goes through this tunnel right here, which is called the carpal tunnel. As the median nerves goes into the carpal tunnel, it supplies the muscles of the wrist and hand. Now, in tracing the radial nerve, we will have to check. Remember, this is the anterior portion. I will have to flip the arm towards the posterior portion. Now, remember that the radial nerve passes the spiral groove from the anterior portion to the posterior region, and it runs along this side of the humerus to go outside here posterior to the brachialis muscle and passes through the elbow region on this side and passes through the posterior region of the forearm to supply the muscles of the posterior forearm. Tracing from the anterior portion of the forearm, or rather the elbow, it pierces through this muscle, the supinator muscle, into the posterior region to this area. Now, this is now the distal portion of the radial nerve. If you see, if I tug this nerve along, this nerve moves, confirming that this is the radial nerve. To trace the ulnar nerve from the pectoral region arm into the forearm, we will have to trace it back here in the brachial plexus. Now flip the pectoralis major out and the minor out. You can see right here the axillary artery, and right here the medial cord of the brachial plexus. Now if we trace this right here, you can see that a nerve arises from that area to the medial portion of the arm, again into the cubital tunnel above the medial epicondyle, and up to the forearm. On the medial side of the forearm, you can see that it passes through this muscle right here. Now this is the ulnar nerve. It's supposed to go into the tunnel of Guyon over on this side of the wrist. So it pierces through this area of the wrist to go into the carpal region of the wrist and hand.